And hello, my fabulous students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. We're talking about social revolutions. And social revolutions occur due to the Atlantic revolutions. And it's really just this is the era of revolutions. Period 5 of the AP curriculum. 1750 to 1900, revolutions, a rethinking of old ways, making new ways better. It's just an exciting time. And so, as a result of the Atlantic revolutions, some other social uh, dichotomies and acceptances are going to get challenged as well. So, let us begin. So, the first one of these to get challenged is this idea that, you know what, slavery is wrong. Um, it shouldn't have started in the first place. And so there's going to be a huge movement somewhat globally to eradicate slavery. They're going to call this abolition, the abolishing or abolition of slavery. So slavery is gonna will end between 1780 and 1890. Slavery will nearly come to an end throughout the world. It does take time. It doesn't just say boom all around the world it's ended. In fact, the first place it'll end will be in England, which we'll talk later here. So the Enlightenment thinkers were largely against slavery. Atlantic revolutions all contained an element of slavery and those who wanted to abolish it. Religious sects like the Quakers and the Protestants were becoming increasingly vocal on this issue. And so this is becoming a hot topic. This idea that, you know what, slavery's wrong. It's wrong to own another person and to compel them, especially mistreat them as the way they have been in the past here. So the belief that slavery wasn't necessary for economic reasons was also growing around the world, especially with the idea of the Industrial Revolution, where you're getting factories and machinery, and the idea of slavery is just not as appealing because it's not necessary. However, in places like that are still very much agricultural, like Brazil, in the West Indies, or the south of the North American of America, those are still very agricultural, and they feel like it's still necessary. So, rebellions in the West Indies earned sympathies for the slaves by showing their brutal treatment and oppression at the hands of the colonists. Now, the abolition movement grew strongest in Britain, as I said earlier, in 1807. They couldn't sell any more slaves within the empire. In 1834, it marked the emancipation, which means the freeing of all slaves in Britain. Growing pressure on all international slave territories to follow Britain and to free them. Majority of Latin American countries ended slavery by 1850. However, Brazil finally got around to it around about 1888. And then in 1861, the Russian serfs were free. So we're seeing a freeing of a lot of people. The African slaves, now the Russian serfs, so they're not practicing serfdom anymore in Russia by 1861. So again, it's a changing of ways. It's a new way of thinking, one that includes equality somewhat, and the understand that there's a sanctity for life and for freedom. Although freed, many slaves unfortunately lived in impoverished circumstances. Great opposition against parties that use slaves as their mode of economy. So you have people who aren't all happy about it. People are yet still very upset. And one of the reasons why Abraham Lincoln was assassinated was because John Wilkes Booth was for slavery and felt like the South still needed slaves to succeed. So national emergence, nationalism emerges. So we have the independence of these territories and these countries. It's going to eventually lead to something. You're going to see older identities begin to fade away. mainly because you have like scientific thinking that's starting to diminish the religious power and influence. You also have the migration to cities or abroad weaken local allegiances. You also have the printing aspect, so we have a bunch of printing happening, and as a result, it's standardizing languages for regions. And language is a great way to sort of combine the people together. As you can see in this graph here, you have language that can kind of unite the people. You have a common history, a common culture, a common religion, a common ethnic group or nationality, a common territory. All these issues can lead to nationalism. And this is going to become a very big part in the rest of history going forward. Nationalism was usually a product of a reawakening of older cultural identities. Nationalism brought political unification to Germany and Italy during this time, inspired faction groups like the Greeks, the Serbs, the slaves, or not the slaves, the Irish, the Jews, the Ukrainians, the Poles, and they're all trying to seek liberation and a national identity. Fueled pre-existing rivalries among European states. It instilled national loyalty in citizens, and then civic nationalism identified that the nation was a particular territory and encouraged assimilation to the culture. And then we're also going to see a movement, a very large movement begin in feminism or women's rights and suffrage. So, with a changing world and the abolition of slavery, women were inspired to take their plight to the global stage finally. This began in Europe and North America. Education was becoming more available to middle class women, thus taking them away from the home and into the workforce. And so they're already kind of becoming more educated and can be used more readily in the workforce because of that education. Women increasingly joined temperance movements, charities, abolition movements, and charities again. Huh. Maternal feminism argued for women's distinctive role as mothers. Decided maternal feminism was this idea that we need to be involved in politics or be able to vote because uh, we have a responsibility as the mothers of this nation to care for the nation, and the best way to care for it would be to be involved, to have a say and a vote. The first conference for women's rights was held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, and here's the official sign that is still there today. By 1870, women's movements focused mainly on suffrage, which is the right to vote. Movement included middle class and not just elites. So now we're getting to the point where it's not just the elite women who want the rights. We're starting to see a lot of women, even middle class, lower class, who will eventually begin to rise up as well. This is going to be a very popular movement. Protests were mostly through peaceful means, became popular in industrialized countries, mainly because industrialized countries were using women more in the workforce because of the factory run operations. And so women were getting more of a say in that they were becoming more of a force in that workforce. By the 1900s, the movement had achieved university admittance for women. We had literacy rates for women began to skyrocket. Women could control property and wages in some countries. And in 1893, New Zealand became the first country to permit women's suffrage. So, New Zealand gets the prize for being the first to allow women to vote within their country. The role of women became a contested topic of discussion. Forbidden, so some things that were forbidden but became more talked about because the role of women is starting to change. You have forbidden sexual topics that were discussed openly. You have people argue that the stress of a occupation for women would lead to reproductive infertility. So somehow the fact that the woman is now focused on the workforce and the stresses and the pain that comes with being in the workforce, it could somehow hinder the woman from reproducing with her husband, and as a result, we will have a drop in the birth rates. And so these are all some of the issues that are now arising because now women are getting that right to vote and as a result be in the workforce. And how does that change society? And how can we make sure that it's not going to affect society in a large manner that could be negative? So other people have anyway, so you can see a lot of people who are sharing their thoughts and their concerns about it. And that's pretty much it. So go ahead and write your one-page summary and I'll discuss this with you back in class.